DevilNeverCry.
So here we are with another challenge video in the middle of Halloween season. Considering there is Resident Evil news looming on the horizon, I thought it would be a good time today to beat Resident Evil 3 Remake from start to finish and get my money back. For the unaware and uninitiated with these challenge videos, here exactly is how things are going to go down. Steam as a platform has a very specific refund policy, wherein they'll provide you a refund, no questions asked, provided that request meets two specific requirements. The first requirement is that your refund request must come within 14 days of purchasing said product, which doesn't apply to us. The second requirement, however, requires us to have less than 2 hours total playtime in the item that we're trying to request a refund for. And so that neatly outlines our challenge for this video. We'll need to beat Resident Evil 3 Remake in under 2 hours if we want to get our money back. Taking a look at the speedrun leaderboard, it's quite obvious that you can beat this game in under 2 hours, provided you know what you're doing, are a seasoned speedrunner, and of course have the liberty of resetting whenever a run doesn't go your way. I, on the other hand, am certainly not a Resident Evil speedrunner, and I definitely won't be resetting. I have a 2-hour cap regardless of whether the run goes my way or not. I haven't played this game in well over 2 years, so this is going to be a huge test of my memory. We're going to be playing on the easiest difficulty we can to give ourselves an advantage, and it goes without saying we'll be playing with a fresh save file using no bonus shop weapons. With that, I can delay no longer. It's time I stop talking and start playing Resident Evil 3 Remake. So here we are. Resident Evil 3 Remake. Typically with this series, I normally tackle hack and slash or action games, but this time we're tackling survival horror. If of course you can still call it that, considering it is a far cry from where the series started out. The reason I started off with 3 Remake instead of any of the other Resident Evil titles is because I remember it being fast even on my first playthrough of the game. I figured that with it being such a fast game to beat, provided I didn't make any major mistakes, I was likely to succeed. As is the norm with this series, I've done pretty much no research on any of the speedrun strategies for this game, so I'm going to be blasing my way through and just kind of hoping I'll get to the end point before 2 hours is up. So after the introductory section where Brad dies, we're given a weapon, we meet Nemesis and Carlos saves us, that's when the game finally begins. We're tasked with getting power back up at the subway station, and to do so, we'll need to manually flip the switches over at a substation on the other side of town. The only issue is, there's a fire blocking the path, and as such, our primary objective is to pick up a fire hose so we can put that fire out. Now at this point, I make the mistake of not killing every enemy I come across, which I really should have, and it's going to come back to bite me in the ass much later. But for the time being, as Nemesis isn't here just yet, I can proceed to the fire hose in relative safely, killing a few enemies along the way and picking up any ammo that is along the way, but not going out of my way to find ammo in shops or side streets or optional areas. Something I didn't realize about assisted mode until I actually started playing was that it gives you an extra weapon at the very beginning, an assault rifle. Think of it as an extra handgun that fires quite rapidly and has a high ammo count. In fact, eventually in this run, I stopped using the handgun altogether and just run straight up with the assault rifle instead. We eventually make our way to the building where the fire hose is and pick it up, making note that there is a shotgun here that we'll need to come back for, but we can't pick it up just yet as we don't have a key item. We eventually backtrack to where we encountered the fire blocking our path and use the fire hose we picked up on a conveniently placed nearby fire hydrant to put out that fire, allowing us to progress. Up in the building ahead is a set of bolt cutters, a key item that will allow us to cut bolts which bar doors. This is exactly the item we need for our shotgun, but there's no point in backtracking there just yet, as a story objective will eventually take us back there, so for the time being we press on. In the upcoming area, we introduce a set of dogs to the concept of projectile euthanasia, and then progress on into the substation. There are a few enemies here that we skip entirely as we make our way to the top, and then we come across a hip pouch. As the name implies, this is a pouch which will give us extra inventory space, which will be well needed. Jill then comes to the realization that she'll have to manually reset the circuit breakers inside the substation itself, which conveniently is infested with giant bugs. The door to the circuit breakers is barred via a huge padlock, which I'm sure we probably could have shot off, but instead we take note of a body lying nearby and pick up the lockpick from its corpse. This key item will allow us to pick any giant yellow lock we come across. There's several in the city we've seen already, which we could backtrack to in relative safely, but for now we're just going to press on. As we're about to enter giant bugland, a cutscene plays which I can only describe as some sort of twisted developer fantasy, where Jill the throat goat shows us that spitters really are quitters. Getting rid of the parasite in us with a green herb, we press on and manually reset all 4 circuit breakers, avoiding and killing any giant bugs we come across. At this point, it's now time to backtrack all the way to the building where we saw the shotgun. Conveniently, as we're skipping down the streets of the city, Nemesis does his best impression of the Kool-Aid Man and bursts through a wall to jump scare us. We are now at the point where Nemesis will chase us throughout the entirety of the city as we aim to complete our objectives. As we only have 1 or 2 things left to do in the area before we leave though, it doesn't matter to us all too much. The issue is, however, is that all of the enemies that I didn't kill will now be up and about, waiting to give us a hug, which can be rather annoying when Nemesis is breathing down our neck. As we continue to deftly dodge Nemesis's hentai tentacle and wild haymakers, we eventually make it into the building with a shotgun where we can finally pick it up. Then we head down the corridor and into the switchboard where we have to reroute power to our train. All that's left now is to backtrack to where we entered the city from, aka the subway station, and do so without dying, which proved to be quite a challenge as we get sent into danger right near the very end. All those zombies that I casually ran past or only downed instead of killing, yeah, they come back to literally bite me in the ass, and I almost die because of it. Thankfully, we're able to get into the subway station without Nemesis putting his fist through our head. Nemesis, not knowing the term unrequited love, continues to chase us all the way into the sewers of Raccoon City, where we finally elude him. Thankfully, this sewer section is relatively short and doesn't offer too much trouble. We simply need to pick up a battery to open up the door which will allow us to escape the sewers. The issue is, the sewers are infested with hunter gammas. These are giant fish-like enemies with tentacles for mouths, which will literally kill you in one hit if you get too close. Thankfully, we find a grenade launcher just lying around in the sewers, which will kill these enemies in one shot. There's nothing much to note about the sewers, other than the odd hunter gamma ambush and the fact that you can pick up an extra hip pouch here. Before long, we're climbing the ladder which will allow us to escape the sewers, and oh look, it's Nemesis. He proceeds to palm our head like a goddamn basketball and lift us off our feet, and then I don't know what happens, because I proceed to skip the cutscene and we're back to the gameplay. We then make our way to the top of this burning construction site and face off against Nemesis, who surprisingly goes down like a chump after only a few rounds from our grenade launcher. And now we return to our primary objective, getting the hell out of Raccoon City via the train that we just powered up. Along the way, we casually raid Kendo's gun shop and pick up an upgrade for our shotgun, and just when we're finally getting back to familiar ground, Nemesis appears again, this time armed with a rocket launcher conveniently telegraphed with a giant laser sight. He proceeds to put on a showcase of the worst aim I've ever seen, definitely a skill issue there, and that's only topped by a giant head almost crushing us before we are able to escape. And as we finally rest our weary legs upon that train, it blows up. But hey, it's time to play as Carlos. We proceed to start this section by pumping Brad full of hot thick lead before moving on to the RPD. Chronologically, this section takes place before Resident Evil 2 Remake, which is why some things may look familiar yet different. Our main task for this section is to find a battery to place on an explosive in the shower room, blowing open that wall, allowing us to access the STARS office. To do so, we must first climb these stairs on the west wing of the RPD all the way to the very top to pick up a key which will allow us to unlock the safety deposit room. After picking up said key, we can backtrack all the way downstairs before we square off with a liquor. Unsurprisingly, after we unload an entire clip from our assault rifle into the skull of this thing, it ends up writhing on the floor and dying. Before we press on, we head over into the standard RPD office to open up a safe. Funnily enough, if you've played RE2 Remake, the combination for the safe is exactly the same, with it also holding the exact same item, that of course being a hip pouch. In fact, all of the padlock codes you see here in Carlos's section are exactly the same as they are in Remake 2, allowing us to pick up a flashbang grenade, which we'll need shortly. After we pick up the battery from the safety deposit room and blow open the wall in the shower room, we quickly throw that flashbang to stun all of the enemies, allowing Carlos to shoulder tackle his way past them and then hit them with a punch so hard they'll get PTSD every time they look at their own hands. Another liquor also makes an appearance here, but at this point it's too late as we enter the STARS office and end Carlos's first section. We then retake control of Jill, who's well rested from her nap after that horrible train crash, and proceed to head above ground. At this point, we conveniently cross a bridge into a scripted running sequence as Nemesis reappears in his mutated form, and then we are faced with another boss fight. Unfortunately, like the first encounter, this boss does not pose much of a challenge. After you lower their health enough, Nemesis will begin to run around the battlefield, allowing you to place a mine with your grenade launcher and blow him out of the sky. Before long, the boss fight ends. Nemesis appears to infect Jill with his hentai tentacle and she passes out. Carlos eventually finds her and he takes her to the hospital where we regain control of Carlos. For whatever reason, I still find the hospital segment of this game to be the most tense and most enjoyable, largely in part probably due to the hunters that roam around this location. As such, I'll be killing 90% of the enemies that I come across in this location. It would have been 100%, but I forgot to kill a few enemies, and it again literally almost bites me in the ass right at the very end. Our first objective is to pick up a key item we'll be needing, a literal key. We do this by getting to the top floor of the hospital and promptly throwing ourselves out the window. Down in the courtyard below, next to an upgrade for our assault rifle, we find our key. This allows us to enter a back room and find the hospital ID card that we'll need to progress on. Just as we're about to leave this room, which is strewn with mangled and bloody bodies, we come across our first hunter. These enemies are huge, very fast, and do a lot of damage, with them also being able to one-shot you if your health is low enough. However, they're not able to overcome the bukkake of bullets Carlos sends directly into their face, and they die. At this point, I'm pretty sure there's another hunter kicking about somewhere in one of these corridors, so I immediately book it to my next objective. We use that hospital ID card we picked up to gain access to another room, and as we look across into the windows, we see two hunters are there waiting to greet us. As I eventually sprint into the room like an 80s action hero, I drop a grenade at their feet and watch them blow themselves to smithereens. This then allows us to pick up our final key item and get the hell out of this room. They just so happen to get the last laugh though, as I'm picking up ammo in a corridor, I get jump scared by another hunter. We finally make our way into Bard's office with that key item and proceed to pick up the vaccine that Jill needs to be cured. And as we finally proceed to make our way over to Jill, a hunter appears for one last showdown. Except I decide to run away from him, and I would have got away with it too, if there wasn't a zombie standing behind the door I needed to get to who was blocking my path. I conveniently end up punching both of them, which knocks them out entirely, and I'm able to get through the door, dodge the remaining enemies, and give Jill her vaccine. But wait, there's more. Now we have to spend the next few minutes as Carlos defending Jill and Tyrell from wave after wave of zombie and hunter inside the hospital. Eventually, after mowing down a god knows how many enemies, we have to wait for an explosion to take place to essentially blow up the main entrance and seal off the rest of the hospital. Think of it as a mini horde mode moment before gameplay finally switches back to Jill. We could explore the hospital as Jill and pick up a magnum amongst a myriad of other items, but there's no need. We don't have time, literally. So, we proceed into the Umbrella Labs, the final quarter of Resident Evil 3 Remake. How nobody realized there was a giant lab underneath a hospital, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. We progress on, picking up a hip pouch, before Nikolai decides to sabotage our progress and disable a lift we need. Jill spends time to pick up 3 separate fuses before heading back to the lift. With new fuses in hand, we're finally able to ascend and progress on. In this upcoming lab section, we're essentially tasked with making a vaccine out of 2 separate key items. We'll need to collect both of them and then synthesize them in a machine. First though, we pick up a USB full of unscrupulous content and debaucherous images, which just so happens to open up a door. We then take the time to traverse around this relatively small lab and pick up these 2 key items, making sure to avoid or kill the new enemy type, the Paleheads. As their name implies, they haven't seen the sun in many a year, but what's important about these enemies is that they can regenerate, which means you'll need to overcome that regenerative factor with an immense amount of firepower, largely directed at their skull. Once we have both items we'll need to synthesize this vaccine, we'll backtrack all the way to the beginning of the lab and enter them into this machine, making sure to get the ratio right to perfect this vaccine. I'd say the lab is pretty much tied with the sewers for being the shortest section in this game. Vaccine in hand, it's finally time for Nemesis to show up, and you know what that means, another scripted segment. After the scripted section is done, it's time for another boss fight against Nemesis. This one largely plays out just like the previous one in front of the clock tower, except from time to time you'll have regular zombies to also contend with. But with some quick help from Carlos, this boss goes down without a fight. Say it with me, but wait, there's more. Like a clingy ex-lover, Nemesis just won't get the hint, so this time we'll have to take him out once and for all with the help of a giant railgun. Don't do what I did in this section, which is to rush and try and put all 3 batteries in at once, because it will kill you just like it did to me. Thankfully I saved beforehand, so I didn't lose too much time. As we get to the end of this boss fight, and Jill lovingly slips the big barrel of her gun deep into the mouth of Nemesis, her frustration, it's getting bigger. I guess it's time for her to pull her devil wrong series, DNC. She pulls the trigger and this dude finally goes down for good. I promise, this is the last one. But wait, there's more. There's one final segment in some form of a fucked up threesome where Jill shoots Nikolai as Carlos holds it down. And it shouldn't come as a surprise, if you miss here, it will be a game over, so don't do that. Finally, as we skip through all of the remaining cutscenes and credit sequence, we come to the total results screen, where we have beaten Resident Evil 3 Remake in 1 hour, 33 minutes and 37 seconds. Well, what do we have here? Another game has yet again been bested, quite comfortably this time, which makes for a nice change considering the previous games were done by the skin of my teeth. Before we go any further, I want to say a huge thank you to those of you who made it to the very end of this video. Thank you for supporting this video and this channel. And for those of you still watching, still listening, I want you to put devastation in the comments section of this video. And if enough of you do so, who knows? Maybe we'll tackle one of the most overlooked hack and slash games in the genre. Getting back on track though, the game has been beaten in under 2 hours, and we are well within our right to request a refund. And I was going to, except just before I hit the button, my dog came up and roundhouse kicked me out of my seat. Turns out he's been reading all of your comments and agrees that refunding games after you've beaten them is a bad idea. Of course, if you enjoyed today's video, do be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing. Not only does it help out a ton with the algorithm, but it means you won't miss out on the next installment of this series. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.